one of the top 10 horror films from Spain and considered the most authentic Cthulhu movie by fans. But its legitimacy lies not only in its homage to the original novels, but more importantly in the fact that it truly exemplifies the core of grisly horror. A diver discovers an eerie structure in the deep sea, adorned with mysterious ancient symbols made entirely of gold. As he is overwhelmed with shock, a mermaid suddenly appears before him. Paul wakes up from the nightmare once again. In fact, nightmares of horrible mermaids had plagued him for a long time, but he had never been able to find out why. His girlfriend Barbara thinks he's just under too much work stress and arranges a yacht vacation for he. However, the unexpected always comes without warning. The clear skies suddenly become shrouded with dark clouds. Howard realizes a storm is coming, and everyone prepares to face it, but the strong winds cause the yacht to hit a reef, trapping Howard's girlfriend Vicky between the cabin and the rocks. With the situation urgent, they scramble to find help. Paul finds the radio mysteriously malfunctioning in the storm, and his attempt to send a flare to a nearby island also goes unanswered. He decides to take Barbara ashore to seek help, while Howard stays behind to comfort Vicky. But what they didn't notice at this time was that under the blood-filled the sea, the unknown creatures on the bottom of the sea had also begun to stir. By the time they realize something is wrong, it's already too late. A sudden gunshot makes Paul and Barbara increasingly uneasy. When they finally reach the island, they find the port deserted and the doors and windows of every house tightly shut. Adding to the eerie atmosphere, that's when the two suddenly hear a song coming from them, and after following the sound to a church, Paul freezes in place because the church's logo turns out to be the same weird symbol he's dreamed about countless times. But with no time to think, he pushes open the door and steps inside. The interior is pitch dark, and by the weak light of a lighter, they find the church worships not the God they know. As they wonder what's happening, a pale priest appears. Barbara quickly explains their situation, and the priest follows them to the dock. After communicating with the fisherman, who had just returned from a fishing trip, he asked Barbara to stay behind on the pretext that he had left one person behind to call the police. But Barbara's phone has no signal. The priest told her she could go to a hotel on the island where there was a landline that could reach the outside world. Barbara's eyes were drawn between her fingers, however, which made her leave a few moments quicker as it boggled her mind. At the hotel, she rushes to the front desk to borrow the phone, but the pale hotel owner is unresponsive. Uneasy, Barbara tries to take the phone herself, only to be overpowered and tied up by the priest and the hotel owner. Meanwhile, Paul returns to the yacht to find Howard and Vicky missing, with only a flashlight and a bloody towel left behind. Back on the island, the priest tells Paul that Barbara has gone to a town 50 kilometers away for help, suggesting Paul wait at the hotel. But Paul, who has come to the hotel, finds Barbara's lighter here, and when the owner turns to get the key, he again sees what looks like a fish's gills on the owner's neck. Paul is confused and searches upstairs for a room. The room's condition shocks him. The lamp is broken, the bathroom is filthy, and the bed is moldy. As he settles in, a shadowy figure appears. Paul thinks it's Barbara, but when the figure turns, he wakes up from another nightmare and hears a commotion outside. He pushed open the window to find the island's inhabitants gathered downstairs, and the men were still poised as if they were zombies. Paul could only leap through the window opening, and although he escaped for the moment, he broke his leg as a result. However, the group is still chasing him. He hides in a warehouse, only to find human skins hanging, the latest one being Howard's. The gruesome sight leaves Paul speechless, and he's soon discovered by the residents. In desperation, Paul knocks over an oil drum and escapes using the flames as cover. While fleeing,
away from me!
Paul encounters a man named Ezekiel. Fearing Ezekiel's shouts will draw attention, Paul hides with him. At that moment, a resident just happened to pass by outside and saw that his hands had actually metamorphosed into squid-like tentacles. Once the coast is clear, Paul asks Ezekiel about his missing friends, but Ezekiel tells him that sooner or later he's going to be eaten alive, just like Howard, and that the two missing ladies are basically doomed as well. Paul questions him about why these people are doing things the way they are, but Ezekiel tells him the story of this fishing village called Mboka. It was when he was very young, and everyone here believed in God, and they prayed to God every day that there would be fish in the sea, but God never answered them. One day, Captain Kambaro came and claimed to know a god who could provide fish and gold, proving it with a gift that summoned the god from the sea. From that day on, Mboka completely flourished, with an endless supply of fish and gold being hauled in, so the residents chose to betray God and began worshipping the evil god named Dagon. However, the good times didn't last long. Dagon gradually became greedy. He no longer provided gold for free but required the residents to offer numerous sacrifices in exchange. In this way, all those who did not worship him became sacrifices, and Ezekiel watched his father die right before his eyes. He himself survived by pretending to be mad. After hearing this story, Paul thought Ezekiel was either crazy or drunk, but now was not the time to worry about that. He just wanted to know how to escape. Ezekiel led him to Captain Kambaro's house and told him that the only car on the island belonged to Kambaro's grandson, Xavier. Seeing that Xavier was as strange-looking as the other islanders, Paul couldn't help but ask the question he was most curious about. What had happened to the people on the island? Ezekiel told him that those who became followers of Dagon were evolving into fish-like beings so they could live in the sea. With Ezekiel's help, Paul managed to sneak into the car, but as he tried to hotwire it, he accidentally honked the horn. In desperation, Paul rushed into the villa, and while evading capture, he stumbled into a room. Inside was a young girl, the very woman who had appeared in Paul's dreams countless times. Strangely, the woman acted very familiar with Paul. She told him her name was Uxia and that she had been waiting for him, begging him to stay. Paul couldn't resist such temptation, but just as he was about to succumb, he suddenly realized something. Lifting the blanket, he found that Uxia's legs had turned into long, thick tentacles. Terrified, Paul fled. In his frantic escape, he hid in what seemed to be an abandoned house, only to find a boy living there with his father, who had already evolved into a fishman. Although Paul managed to kill them, the noise alerted other followers in the house. So, in the end, he failed to escape. When he woke up again, he saw Barbara. It turned out she, Ezekiel, and even Vicky were still alive, only imprisoned by the followers. Just as they were planning how to escape, the priest arrived with a group of people. Paul wasn't about to give up. As soon as the priest opened the door, Paul knocked him down. The others tried to resist too, but they were outnumbered and overpowered. To avoid becoming a sacrifice, Vicky chose to end her own life. Paul and Ezekiel were then taken to a warehouse. This time, Ezekiel couldn't pretend to be mad anymore.
For his name's sake.
The priest skinned him alive and then turned the knife to Paul. Just as Paul was about to accept his fate, Uxia suddenly burst in, saving him. It turned out Uxia was the priestess there. She once again asked Paul to stay, saying it was his only destiny.
We will go soon to a beautiful place. You will forget your world and your friends. There will be no time, no end. Not today, not yesterday, not tomorrow. Only the forever, and forever, and forever without end.
Seeing Paul's despair and confusion, Uxia gave some brief instructions and left. After being untied, Paul channeled his anger and frustration into action, swiftly killing the priest and others. Remembering that Ellie was still missing, he grabbed a can of gasoline and went to the church, only to find it empty. Following a faint song, he found a hidden passage in a cabinet. Inside, Uxia was leading a sacrificial ceremony, and the sacrifice was the separated Ellie. Paul poured gasoline on the followers and quickly set them on fire, interrupting the evil ritual. Amid the chaos, Paul pulled Ellie up, but her eyes were blank. He didn't know what Ellie had seen, only that she kept asking him to kill her. Paul was heartbroken and just about to rescue her when a huge shadow suddenly dragged Ellie away. It was the evil god Dagon. The terrifying scene drove Paul to despair. He let the followers vent their anger on him. Xavier then approached him. Seeing that Paul had gills growing on his abdomen, Xavier revealed a harsh truth. Paul was his son. In his youth, Xavier often traded to bring women to the island, including Paul's mother, who fled with Paul after giving birth. Unable to accept this, Paul doused himself in gasoline, intending to end it all and destroy his fate, but he wasn't even granted the right to end his own life. Uxia decisively pulled him into the sea with her. At the end of the story, Paul, whose bloodline has awakened, grows fish gills, and he eventually accepts his fate. Led by Uxia, they swam toward Dagon's dark abyss.